Racing against the clock, British and European negotiators have been trying to thrash out Brexit deal ahead of a key EU summit starts tomorrow. But so far, there's no sign of any white smoke in Brussels. The European Council President Donald Tusk told journalists that the foundations of a deal are ready and that it should be clear before midnight just when Brexit will happen. The UK is currently set to leave the EU at the end of the month, but sources in Brussels say a number of significant issues still need to be resolved, particularly around trade and customs arrangements. Well, for the very latest on what's been happening and reaction as well too, let's speak to our political editor Darren McCaffrey in Brussels and our UK correspondent Vincent McAviney in London. Darren, let me turn to you first. Donald Tusk, they're saying that we could have more clarity in a few hours. Do we have any more details on what he said and why we can't have that clarity now?
Well, wouldn't we love that clarity now, Totes? Hopefully we will have it in several hours' time. As you say, he's just been speaking to journalists in Poland, in which he said that he thinks that yesterday evening there was a sense that a deal had been agreed, but today there are certain doubts on the British side. It goes on to say, though, as you rightly point out, that in 7 or 8 hours, theoretically, everything should be clear, but adds that he thinks the basic foundations of an agreement are ready and tomorrow could be accepted in a deal with Great Britain, could, of course, be accepted. That may well be the crucial thing, because we certainly just don't know for a definite. Michel Barnier, he was due to brief EU ambassadors earlier on today. Well, that meeting has just been delayed for a second time as these negotiations continue. And we have to remember, Totes, of course, this is not simply just a negotiation between Downing Street and the EU Commission here in Brussels. It obviously involves other European capitals like Berlin, Paris, and particularly Dublin as well. But notably also the domestic British politics back in London. These talks clearly involve UK cabinet, Tory MPs, and indeed Northern Irish MPs. But still, the talks seemed to be halted by three main obstacles, which are on consent, essentially what is the role of Northern Ireland in the future in deciding its place and its relationship with the European Union. Second of all, on its customs arrangements, clearly Boris Johnson wanted to leave the EU's customs union to a degree, but still effectively de facto be a member. And third of all, on this future trade deal, just how different how far off in a very different direction does Britain want to go in the future? So those sticking points still remain. Negotiations continue, but still the prospect and the possibility that a deal could be reached.
Well, as these talks drag on, Vincent, let me turn to you. Boris Johnson, of course, has said he'd rather be dead than ask for a delay. Can he avoid that at this point?
Good afternoon, Totes. Well, Boris Johnson, by law, under the Benn Act, has to sign a letter requesting a delay if he hasn't got a deal from the European Union that has then got through the House of Commons on what is being dubbed Super Saturday. And so the Prime Minister has been meeting with his cabinet in the past few hours. They met for only about 45 minutes, which is quite a short cabinet meeting. They delayed it from Tuesday morning because they thought that they would be in a position now to get everything signed off ahead of that EU Council. That is still obviously not the situation. Everything is up in the air. But Stephen Barclay, who is the Brexit Secretary, has been before a select committee today in Parliament being quizzed about what will exactly happen on Saturday. If the Prime Minister can't get his deal through the House of Commons, he was asked about the Benn Act, whether the Prime Minister would honour it. And he was asked about this extension. He said, I think it's important that we leave on the 31st of October, but he said it would the law would be fulfilled. He was really probed on that a few times, and he did say the letter would be sent. He said it had been unhelpful during the negotiations and it had weakened the negotiating hand of the government. And he was also quizzed about an idea that the Prime Minister might send a letter, thereby fulfilling the obligations of the law, but then send a second letter saying, oh, please ignore that first one, a tactic that it was thought the government might have been trying to pursue. He said there had not been any such plans to try to do that. So everyone here in Westminster waiting to see what the Prime Minister can hammer out with Arlene Foster, the leader of the DUP, over the next few hours, because at the moment, no one knows, frankly, what is going to happen.
Darren, let me turn back to you briefly, if you can. Even if this deal is, we do have clarity before midnight, Will the EU summit, in terms of procedure, allow for it to be signed off tomorrow?
Well, in theory, and you would have thought not, given the fact, of course, that Michel Barnier had set that deadline of last night at midnight. We're now looking at another deadline 24 hours later. And normally, in normal circumstances, that document, because it is a legally binding withdrawal agreement, would need to be in place today in order for leaders to consider it tomorrow. But clearly, listening to what Donald Tusk has just said, there is a political will to try and get a deal done. Don't forget, Boris Johnson, in some ways, wants and needs a deal with the European Union, but the EU are very keen to strike one too, and they know that this might be one of their best chances, given that timetable that the British Prime Minister has set out. So it is possible that the EU leaders could sign off on this tomorrow if there is a deal. If not, negotiations could well continue, and there is still talk that we could see another EU Council summit at some point between now and the end of the month, again in an attempt to heave that deal, if there is one, over the line.
Well, before any of that happens, let's hope we get that clarity before midnight, as Donald Tusk has promised. For now, our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, and Vincent McAvaney in London, thank you.